Hello, welcome to I think this might be the very first conversation with Stream in December. So welcome to our first Christmas themed Agora conversation. We have an amazing guest here today that has a great deal of experience. He's he's been around for quite a while. He's won lots of awards. And he's got a lot of stories to tell. It's definitely a very funny individual. I love having conversations with this particular individual. It's kind of one of those people that you feel like you just talk to for hours, just because he's got lots of interesting ideas. He's quite the creative visionary, as far as I'm concerned. We'll bring in David. We can talk more about him and then bring him on the show. Hello, David.
Hey, Bren.
How are you?
I agree. Daniel Gies is pretty awesome. I was also looking forward to this one. It's been a while since we planned this one, so I can't believe we're already there in December having this conversation.
Here we are. Actually, we have a crazy list of people we're booking out well into the next year now with people. They're not all on the calendars yet, but they're all under work. So we have a lot of really interesting conversations to come in the new year for sure.
I think we got scared at some point. Like, holy shit, we have just 2 more of those. We need to invite a few more people, and then it got out of control, and we're now booking like March of next year. But that's good. We keeping a pace of 1 guest a week is it's a good pace. I like it.
I agree. Yeah. So Daniel, it's interesting because Daniel's backstory here obviously is quite deep, but the interaction between Agora and Daniel happened relatively recently, right?
Yeah, we had mutual friends that put us in contact. At the time, I think it was 2 years, a little bit more than 2 years ago. They were working on a short film, and we helped a little bit to complete animation, and then we stayed in touch with Dan, who was the artistic director and director of the short film. So we remained in touch since then, and he also helped a little bit on some of our own personal project that we're doing at Agora with the little game that we're developing. So
some of you might have seen that. We streamed that a little while ago. I was kind of doing a play test, and Andrew was making fun of how bad I was. It was a lot of the like artistic vision is coming from this wonderful man's mind. So it's kind of fun to meet one of the people behind the scenes on that. Also, just another fun fact: Daniel was one of the co-founders of Ed Film. Is it Ed Film or Ed Films? I can't remember.
I think it's Ed Film, but let's ask him.
Oh, okay. I always thought as Ed, but Ed makes way more sense because I guess D stands for Daniel. I just put two. I'm so dumb. I'm not the smartest.
I'm pretty sure D doesn't stand for that. That would be a good first question for our friend here.
Okay, well, let's bring him in. Daniel, here we go. Hello, Daniel.
I'm here. I'm not muted anymore.
Sweet.
Hello, I'm here. Thank you for having me.
So, try to demystify this particular conversation. Does ED, is it ED, or is it Ed? Is D for Daniel? Come on, help us out here.
It's actually, so it's ED. And it's funny because depending on who you ask, some people think it's Ed. Some people think it's actually erectile dysfunction films. And Emily, my business partner, she says, it's usually men over 40 think it's erectile dysfunction films.
It's context is important.
I don't know why that is. Yeah. exactly. But no, it's because the original company name was Everyone Dies Films.
Ah,
So yeah,
for real.
yeah.
Oh,
Because
interesting.
I started the film when the company, the bank account for the company was started when I was a morose and miserable teenager, philosophical and all intense. So it was Everyone Dies Films. But as we started, we had this company was there. It was a sole proprietorship, and we had the YouTube channel, which I started in 2006 or 7, and it was under Everyone Dies Films at gmail.com, and I couldn't change it. We couldn't ever change it, so we got stuck with it. So now it's just ED, and then most people think it's Emily Dan or because Emily's the other co-founder of the company.
It's perfect because it's meta, right? Like it could be whatever you want it to be.
Exactly. It's the worst name ever. We're really bad with names of things in our company. But what's interesting, I think, about a name is that if you say any word enough times, it loses all meaning, and you just don't even think of it anymore. So yeah, it's the worst name for anything. But then the hope is that the work itself, outshines the terrible name.
I find that relatively ironic that probably one of the most creative firms in Canada has trouble with a quote unquote boring name. But
we have the worst names.
We all have the crosses to bear, and I guess this is yours. That's fine.
No, exactly. It's fine. I'll take those. Thank you. Yes.
So is there any philosophical background behind the name? Like everyone dies, so we need to make the best of it and be creative and no time to waste it? Or is it just, I'm depressed?
No, it wasn't so much about depression. It was more, it was high school philosophy, university 101 philosophy perspective of, I grew up in the forest, and I used to spend a lot of time out in the woods. I grew up just beside an indigenous reserve. So the land was all undeveloped forest. It's in the Kananaskis Valley, which is out west near the mountains. So I spent a lot of time in the forests and out in the woods. And so I think I just started getting this sense of everything comes and goes. There was just sort of, and I've always been an anxious person about, I'm not going to have enough time. I'm not going to have time to do all those things. Because you guys know animation, it takes forever. So it always feels like the smallest idea is going to take a lifetime to realize. And I think there was that aspect of just the awareness of mortality, and the also, I don't know, you're just never gonna have enough time, and that everything is gonna pass. It's not that important. And I think initially too, there was a little bit of a thing. We used to watch a lot of independent film when we were young, and it was really interesting. In every story, it's like the biggest thing that can happen in film is somebody dies. And it's really funny how it's like the catalyst for so many films is somebody dies or something. Anyways, so there's that element of it as well. So it has a lot of convoluted reasons for being, I suppose.
It's pretty cool. You mentioned that you've grew up in the wood. Do you feel that has some, influence of becoming an artist or a creative person in general? Because this is definitely something that we see in a lot of the art that you're creating. But I can imagine that at the same time, just the fact of, wandering in the woods, doing nothing and just having your imagination running wild, kind of over time develop this muscle to make a creative, or develop this creative part of the brain.
Yeah, I'm curious about that too. I wonder how much. I read a book a while ago, and it was, I wish I could remember who it was written by, but it was all about walking and how important just walking, and not walking specifically to a place is, but just going for a walk. And I think what was, to your point of what's interesting, I think you could do it in a city as well. But just that thing of being in your mind and not having other things to do or tasks at hand. So what happens is there's a tendency to reflect and observe and just be present. And I think that also because the forest I grew up in was really dangerous. It's full of cougars, bears. It's not the safest place. It was completely normal for you to be walking with your dog and you look over and suddenly it's gone because some animal had grabbed it and ran off with it. That wasn't uncommon. You weren't supposed to leave kids in backyards unattended because they could be picked up by a cougar.
It's interesting because it adds just another layer to the everyone dies cake.
I know. You come across dead bodies everywhere out there. Not human bodies. Not human bodies. But yeah, so I guess that there's just something about that environment that definitely allows a lot of thought and contemplation to happen. And plus, forests are boring. I know everyone's like, "Oh, nature's amazing." It's so, but honestly, like when you walk every single day and you're out in the woods, it is the constant. It is a constant background. It always, yes, it's alive and wonderful, but there is something about the imagination that has to, at least for me, it has to add a human vector to it to make it more stimulating, to make to build an element of fantasy and adventure into it. Because I think nature on its own, it's a very functional place to me. You know, it's not there's not elves hiding in the shadows with all these complex storylines.
Wait, what?
No, I'm sorry, they're not there. I haven't seen any, but I'm always looking for fairies and elves, but I never met any. So
okay.
Yeah, it's because of the wildlife. They've all been eaten.
They've all been eaten. Yes, I've seen their bodies, but yeah.
So is that something that you're missing, being now,
Stuck in the city?
Stuck in the dirty city.
Exactly.
Yeah, you know what's funny? Because since COVID, I've known a lot of people, and I'm sure you guys know people too have moved out.
There's a lot of people that are going back.
So many.
Yeah, let's get out to the country.
Yeah.
Well, hello, Laurentians.
Yeah, exactly.
If there's an internet connection, they're going. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if I don't, because the thing is, I think because I grew up in it so long, and then after I lived and I grew up in the forest for so long, and then I moved to work in the Banff Center, and the Banff Center is in the Banff Mountains. It's in the Rocky Mountains, and
so beautiful there.
Yeah, it's amazing, right? But I was completely spoiled by it. I even grew up at the bottom of a ski hill and never skied once. You know, I was just that kind of person. I never participated in human activity on that level. But the thing that I think because when I finally left Banff, I was like, I am so sick of drawing every commission I had, every commercial I did, every animation I did had to have mountains and had to have forests and trees. And I just got really tired of it. And I don't, in Alberta, the fashion is not top priority in Alberta. At least it wasn't when I was growing up. Mostly people wear ball caps, jean jackets, and blue jeans. And there was a lack of human stimulation that I had, where because I used to be in a band, and we went on tour in Montreal, and I was completely blown away by people wearing scarves and hats and colored jackets, all this stuff. And I think so much of, as much as I love nature, most of the stories that we get involved with are human centric, right? That's the way we tell stories, through the lens of human experience. And you can't have a story that communicates well with humans unless it's there's humans in it, or it's anthropomorphized animals that have been turned. So all that to say is, I really felt understimulated and undereducated on people, and I was fascinated with people on the same level you might at that point, the same level you might be fascinated with animals, where you're just like, wow, there's so many different colors and shapes, and it was just really stimulating and interesting. And I haven't really lost that since leaving. I miss the smell of the forest. I miss that, but for I do not find a forest rejuvenating on a day-to-day basis, like a week after week, month after month, year after year. I find them, they're kind of dark and oppressive, and you have to bring your own energy to them. Like for me, like you can feel the forest and the trees and all that stuff, but it doesn't necessarily stimulate everything that makes a human to me. I think you need other people for that.
Yeah.
So, for me anyway.
So it's not necessarily a place that you would go back to reconnect with your creative self and be inspired and, just have new ideas.
Yeah, for a visit, like a touch and go, or for like a few months, to do a few months residency or something like that. But actually, for me, the idea of moving my life to a forest or back to the country, it doesn't really excite me in that way. I kind of feel like it actually feels more oppressive in a weird way.
Yeah.
Because also I feel like it's not very free. You have to drive everywhere. You have to plan everything. And you're you're a victim of the elements a lot more too. So anyways.
Yeah, I'm wondering if that's something that most of the people that got out of the city and either went into a suburb or even further in the wood are now realizing exactly what you mentioned, that you need to take your car for everything and you need to plan everything. And, your closest friend might be 15 minutes of drive in this direction. I'm wondering if there was a romanticization a little bit
For sure. I
of this
predict
part.
a lot of them coming back. A lot. They're
I
like,
actually,
"Hey,
to some degree
tried
too.
it," and
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. You have to be very self-contained. I think some people can do it very, very well, and for others, I think it demands a lot of discipline too. Like, because there's no gym. It's not easy to get to the gym, and it's not even easy to drag yourself out for a walk in the woods every day, because it doesn't really change that much. So it's not like, or you're not going to go pick up groceries. Like, we walk tons in the city because it's like you got to get stuff all the time. So I think there's a lot of discipline. It almost has to be like a meditative practice for me, in order, like, I had dogs, so it dragged you out every day. You had to go out there. So you would take those opportunities to be stimulated by and informed by nature. But I think if you're left to your own devices, it's really hard to enforce that kind of routine, at least in my opinion.
If you could fully run your studio company from home, would you do it? Because there's a part of all this, let's go out of the city, is directly connected to the fact that, well, I do not need to be at work anymore. Or if I do, it's going to be once in a while, or maximum once or twice a week, no more than that. What is your thoughts on that for you personally, working from home compared to being on site at the studio?
Well, I worked from home almost my whole life. So I think because I worked at the Banff Center for a few years, obviously, but before that, well, even since 2007, we only got in this specific studio space, I think 4 or 5 years ago. So before that, we were just working from the basement, or had a studio, the studio space upstairs. People were coming into the house all the time. So I've worked from home a lot. I think it's great. Again, I still think I had a teacher once at the Banff Center. He was a mentor, and he said, no matter what you do, get out of your sweatpants and put on some decent clothes every day that you get up and go to, even if you're at home. And he said that the reason was it was to change your frame, your mind. So you're creating a routine around being away. You're not just drifting into work. And I think that works for some people. It really depends on your mental profile and how how much well you understand yourself. But he was saying, and I found that too, is like when I used to sleep right beside my computer desk. At one point, I was working on a short film in Banff, and I couldn't afford an apartment because it was being paid for by the production. And so they got me this tiny little room that was as small as the space I'm right now. And I had a bed, the computer, and like a little hot plate over there. And I would lie in the bed, wake up, roll over, and then start working. And be like, oh my God, I got to go for a walk at some point. And I found it was really mentally unhealthy for me. Like it actually made me feel insane. And I got to a point where I was jumping at shadows or people's faces. I'd just be thrown off by people. And I think fundamentally, I feel like human beings are very social creatures. Most of our values are based in comparative social analysis. We're always comparing ourselves to other people and what other people are like. And I think that without that, it can be very, very, very hard on us. We're almost like, would you say, like cannibalizing ourselves at that point, or myself? I can't speak for everybody, obviously.
Yeah, that's one of the main struggle. I mean, at the beginning of the pandemic, everyone was like, "Whoa, okay, I love this thing of working from home. I hate it," and everyone was kind of trying to, adjust to it. But eventually, one of the main negative point that I've heard was this blurred line of I have a very hard time to decipher when I should start to work, when I stop working. Meaning that when I'm working, I'm distracted by stuff that is not work, and when I'm not working, I'm thinking about work. So it's not really relaxing, and it's everything that you mentioned, that people that would literally go out, take a 10-minute walk, come back home, and starts to work, and then do something similar at the end, just to mentally. I know that for myself, I was never super disciplined with routine, but that's one of the things that the pandemic arise. Like, okay, I'm going to wake up at this. That's going to be my routine pre-work. I'm going to work from this hour to this hour. At 5 p.m., no matter what, I stop, go have dinner and all that. And if I need to work, I'm going to come back, but kind of be very rigid with the amount of hours and when I would work, because otherwise you just lose track of time. And
Yeah.
the line are blurred, and you're not fully effective when you're working, and you're not fully relaxing and enjoying life when you're not working. So
Yeah, that's true. That's it. I think that's one of the worst aspects. It's the hardest aspect. I think there's personalities that are really good at that because they're great at compartmentalizing, and they're also good at scheduling. And it just depends. I don't meet a lot of animators that have that level of attention to detail to their own personal self. All that attention to detail goes into their work. It doesn't go into looking at themselves. And I feel like, we're all older, so we've certainly gotten to know ourselves a lot better. But I can't imagine being a young artist right now, dealing with the responsibility of having to manage your own mental health as well as your work, and you kind of balance all those things out without any mentorship to guide you in the best practices of how to do that. We're just not. No one know. We're not taught how to do that.
I think that's a really interesting point that you made there with regards to just how animators, generally speaking, we tend to be very like, because I agree with that. I feel like I see that pattern in a lot of my friends who are animators they have attention to detail for sure, because they wouldn't be good at their jobs if they didn't have that. But it's funny how a lot of that is dedicated to examining the other and understanding them, as opposed to looking internally. Because I mean, I really resonated this idea of like, I like routines. I really struggle with being disciplined with any kind of routine. And like you talked about how you were getting up, you wake up, you'd roll out of bed, and then you just start working right away. I feel like for me, things get so blurry that I try to do those things too, but not necessarily in the right order. You know what I mean? It's almost like I'm kind of like, am I just working from bed now? Like, I mean, it's interesting how it just sort of blends together when you are just working out of your home. Like it ends up being very difficult to just compartmentalized.
Brent, were you able to do sort of what David did, is start to partition your day more effectively? Have you started to do that, or is it just still mush pit?
It's a complete mushy. I mean, it's not entirely true. I do have a bit of a routine, but it's like I've always been a night owl, so I have a tendency of like when the family goes to bed, I just don't stop. I'm just doing stuff.
Yeah.
And I mean, even if I'm not doing anything in particular, I'm thinking about stuff like all the time. And so, but I don't mind it because I actually really like that. It's just who I am. I tend to always be thinking about things. So I don't feel like it depresses me, but I do feel like it disconnects me a little bit from everybody else. Like I feel like I'm becoming more and more a hermit. And I shower less and less.
Exactly. Well, I think that's what I'm talking about, the forest. Like when you live in a city, you can be like, okay, I'm going to go out for a drink. I'll go to a coffee shop. You do have external stimulation in a different way that's more human and more accountable, I think. That hermit mode can really, to me, kick in. Obviously, you can do that when there's people all around you if you just really start to disengage. But when you're animators and you're always observing people, I feel like it becomes a dry well very quickly. And I think it's just something I don't consider the country to necessarily be the place to fuel inspiration unless you're ready for it, or unless you make that space for it. I think it has to be, for me, an active choice. Like I'm going out here to pay attention. It has to be a bit active. I don't think it just happens by osmosis necessarily.
So how was so you went from freelancing home, having a hard time, to kind of establish this line, to having your own studio and being in the office, and then COVID arrived and you have to go back home. So how was this transition back for you in early 2020?
I actually never stopped coming into the studio, because this studio space, we share it with another company, and I think there's like enough space for 200 people or something like that. I don't know. It's huge. Maybe it's only 150. But I think I didn't stop coming in because all of them were all staying home. So I was like, this place is safer than the grocery store. I don't know, like if there was no one here. And so for me, it was great because I could make the environment really more my vibe. So I really it didn't affect me in that way. I'm fine working from home. I don't mind working from home. I don't have the best setup at home though, because I'm kind of hunched down at this little table, and it's not, it doesn't, and I don't have like my instruments there and everything. So it's not my favorite place to work anymore. I've definitely put that separation, which I was really afraid of at first. I was really nervous that having to go to the studio, because it's a bit of a walk. It's about a 20-minute walk to get to the studio, but I find it's great. Like I don't work as often late at night anymore as I used to, because I have to walk here. So I won't just work until I'm exhausted and then fall asleep. But anyways, the pandemic didn't really keep me from the studio, but it kept everyone else out of the studio, which in some ways was great at first. And then in other ways, because it was like, yeah, I got this whole space, it's awesome, and no interruptions, it's amazing. The downside of it though, and I think that's where we're going to see, I think we're probably going to see a hybrid model of how people work now. You know, like the idea, like if you're commuting 45 minutes to an hour and a half a day, that's a huge amount of self-care time that you could be taking out of a week, like to work out or go for a walk. And that's a lot of time that people didn't have, and you only need that like 3 or 4 days a week to be good. So like, but at the same time, it's really interesting. And I'd be interested to know what you guys think about this too, is like when I sit with another artist and we work on a shot together, if I'm sitting with them, we make a ton of progress and we have all these discoveries, and we kind of, because I'm very technical too. So I'll understand kind of, I can suggest technical solutions that will then create a chain reaction of like, oh yeah, this, and this. But if I'm just receiving, screenshots, or like I'm receiving drafts, it's much less intuitive of how to give feedback on that and to how to contribute, because now I'm more looking at this like finished thing, and I'm not part of the process in the same way. And I think that's like, to me, that's a big thing we're losing by being at home so much, is that kind of sitting down and actually working together and brainstorming in a physical space, because we read body language, we smell. I mean, obviously all animators, we don't all smell great, but there's something about being in the
Especially
same
me
room.
if I don't shower.
Exactly. It depends on the day, depends on the deadline, but there's something very different about being in a room with people and riffing. Yeah. It's like, I put it a lot, because like I said, I was in a band. It's so much to me like jamming. If you're in a band and you're jamming, like I would hate to be in a band jamming over webcam and like trying to write music, it just doesn't, the energy doesn't work the same. It's just weird. We tried it. Actually, I was working, when we were talking about Harry Hill, I was working on music for Harry Hill with Tyler Fitzmaurice, who's the head of Agora that we're working with. And he was in Winnipeg at the time. And we were trying to do these live mixing sessions where we were basically doing what we're doing here. And we had Pro Tools open, and it was doing this live sync thing. And it was cool. We made it work, but it wasn't the same as being in the room with him, having a beer, hanging out, and really just feeling the space, and having instruments to look over and be like, oh, let's try this thing. And it just lost all of that. So
yeah, I agree. I'm wondering if it's really because it's less efficient, or it's because it's completely new and we've been, for entire life used to, we're communicating this way, we're taking those subtle cues this way. Because for me, having, let's say, a meeting that's going to be more about, management recaps, basically sharing information. We just need to make sure that this information is in everyone's brain. That is, it's fine, getting used to it. But brainstorm and having just, and even brainstorming with one person, not too bad. With two, it's fine. We try some brainstorm with 6 people. That would be like very easy in a small room, that we would just, riff on ideas, and sometimes, okay, those 2 are in their own bubble and they talk for 2 minutes and then they come back and it's a very fluid conversation. We tried that on Zoom. It's a nightmare. It just doesn't work, because it's as if you were brainstorming, that you have like 6 chairs in a circle and there's one mic and you pass the mic and everyone is waiting for their turn, and you don't, because just the way the sound and audio is working, you cannot be 3 people talking at the same time. It could work in a real environment, because depending on the distance and how close, and those sub conversation just appear, come and go. But like this, so I think it's fine for some type of conversation. or exchange or communication in general. And for others that are more
Yeah.
creative and free flow and all that, it's super
Yeah.
difficult.
I find that for me, it has a lot to do with just the lack of being able to pick up on people's body language accurately. Like, it's like when you're like, and I really believe in auras, like this idea of people have certain energies and it's infectious. If you're in a room with people who have positive energy that's like yours, and it's electric. It's like, it's just never the same when you're not there. Like, but when you're there, like when I started going into work recently, I'd almost convinced myself that, I mean, I feel like working from home is fine, and it is fine, but it's not the same. And it can't replace having those kind of brainstorming sessions in person with people, like it just does not. I felt the best I had felt for so long, just being in the office with some people that were like-minded, excited to brainstorm and to think creatively. It was electric, and it felt really good. So it can't be replaced. But so hybrid is going to be the key, I think, moving forward for sure.
Yeah,
and besides,
go ahead.
I was just going to say too, like, so it's funny that you were in this big, huge space by yourself. At some point, did you start feeling like you were maybe Will Smith in I Am Legend, where like it was like you're living in this like post-apocalyptic world, and this whole pad is yours now? Okay, that's cool for maybe a couple of weeks, and then it's like suddenly it's not so cool because it's only really fun when you share it with people,
Yeah, there is that element. I mean, I was running laps around the place to get exercise. Just, I didn't have the treadmill with my dog on it, and my shirt off, and my big muscles like Will Smith. But I definitely, I do feel like it does lack that energy. And I think there's something about, with the metaverse that Facebook wants to do and all this interesting stuff. I do feel like this idea of VR and being able to put on a helmet and be able to have anywhere near the social experience. Like, obviously you can have some kind of social experience, and especially we're not digital natives in the way that all the people behind us, like 10 years, 20 years younger than us, have been immersed in this. So maybe what we're talking about fits more for us, but I do think I'm theoretically, I believe that there is so much more to interacting with people that rejuvenates us and energizes us. Like, obviously not everybody. I think even introverts need to have a little bit of energy filled, something fill into them. But all I'm saying is that, this idea of having VR, and even it's a superficial account of what human interaction needs to be. The idea that we could ever just put something on, and even if we solved like what you're saying, David, with you can't talk in little pockets, and I agree with you. It's like at any party, you don't all just stand in a circle looking at each other, waiting for each other to talk. That's not how parties work. Like there becomes a din, and there becomes like you're kind of spontaneously bopping around like little molecules in a room. And the thing is you can't do that. But even if you could do that in a VR space, I'm still skeptical that it would be as fulfilling or as stimulating, or would have the kind of the natural entropy of what a real space would have to stimulate real. It's like everything we do at the studio, we incorporate natural elements. Like that's just every animation we do, every project, it's like things come from hand painted stuff. We scan things, take photographs, like constantly reference the real world, trying to get that kind of humanity back into things. And which is why CG animation sucked for so long, is it was so mathematical, and it was like so hard to get that human element. And now, that's been overcome with so much technology and so much work and knowledge. But
that's such an amazing segue to what I wanted to get into. Like, because you've been doing this CG art thing for quite a while. As a matter of fact, fun fact, and correct me if I'm wrong, and hopefully our information is correct on the website, but you started with Power Animator. Was that your first foray into digital 3D?
Yeah. Even before that, I was using this thing, Autodesk Animator, which was even before that, and that was just 2D. Pixel based. I think it was late 80s, early 90s that came out.
I still have the textbook from that software. It's
I wish I could find that, because I did so many animations on that thing when I was a little kid, and I used to just draw with a mouse. It's like trying to draw with a bar of soap. You're just like, it's the worst. It's the worst drawing experience ever.
Yeah. It's funny. So just for those who aren't like ancient fossils like the three of us, Power Animator actually was designed by a company in Toronto called Alias, and Wavefront was a different software. Those two companies merged, and Maya was born out of that merger. Just FYI. So what we're talking about here predates Maya. It's quite
way back.
Quite a ways back. Yeah.
Yeah.
So did you feel like, what was that like? Because I mean, like, because you started with this, but it feels like, because the way you were describing 3D and how a lot of it just sort of sucks, it feels like a lot of it you attribute to this sort of lifeless, soulless sort of art that sometimes tends to get created out of 3D versus like, something's more organic and much more, I guess full of life. Like, how did you, like? I'm curious how your creative process started with regards to using software that wasn't necessarily shining in those kind of ways.
Yeah, that's a good. It's interesting because I actually think that the reason. Well, I won't say the reason, but the software at the time, it was so much about the software. It was like the tool was everything, because the tool couldn't really do much. I think that's as much as there was a lot of cool 3D stuff that was done in the 80s, even in the 70s, there was interesting stuff being done, but it just took monumental efforts and a huge amount you needed to be more of a programming engineer to actually be able to do anything significant. It just wasn't, there just wasn't that much for artists to do in those platforms. So for me, a lot of that stuff was the experimental. I was mostly experimenting and doing odd little things here and there. And I just don't think that the software at the time had the fidelity to capture enough of the nuance that makes the world that we perceive as complex and chaotic. There just wasn't the resolution. And I mean that in everything, like, whether it's, I don't just mean pixels. I mean like the capacity for the program to execute so many different variations of simulation and cloth and bone and all that stuff. So the less of that you have, the more rigid what you're making is. And unless you really understand that tool, so I feel like you see a lot of stuff now, which is really cool, where people will make super retro animations. But what they're doing is they're taking, decades of, I would say, almost inherited computer knowledge and art, and they're able to like apply that to a tool that we were just learning how to use. So we didn't even know how to use it well most of the time. I think, a lot of early CG art, it doesn't look great because it wasn't artists using it a lot, or people that had a lot of experience to know how to use the limits of the tool, right? They were more just discovering it. But I still argue today is like, I see those old bitmap games, or the old LucasArts games, or the old, the Sierra games, and they still look kind of strangely eerie and beautiful today. And they were just done in pixels because the color and the placement and everything was a very artistic process. There'd already been 10 or 20 years of pixel art being done. So a lot of knowledge was happening there. So I think the birth of all technology, I feel like that was VR too, is that we just don't understand the best way to utilize it initially. You can have the greatest artists in the world working on this stuff, but it doesn't necessarily translate to a viable experience when you're in a different technology, And I think when they first, at least my understanding of when they first had film, I just learned this recently, is it took them decades before someone ever did a cut. Like before they actually would do action in a room, like let's say I walk in the room, they would film the whole action. Guy walks in the room, looks around, picks something up, something happens. They never cut, they never did a close-up. And it only happened by accident that someone did it because they thought it would break people's brains, essentially. They would lose, coherence. They would be like, oh, how did I teleport to this person's face? They didn't think it was possible. And so it wasn't until someone accidentally did it and they saw it happen more and more that people were like, oh, wait, we don't have to show the people get off the horse and walk we could just show them hop off and cut to something else, and our brains stitch all the rest together. And so it's really interesting. And I think until we really look at technology through, and it's the same thing when we were talking about working from home, at least in my mind, is until we look at like, how does the human brain perceive reality? What information do we really need to give it? And where are we wasting our time? Where are we filling in all these details that don't need to be there to actually make the experience more? They're doing it in game engines all the time, right? They're doing that stuff now where they actually will do textures will decrease in quality as they get further from the center of the screen or center of
LOD.
focus. It's like this dynamic focus shifting. And if you actually took a snapshot of the screen and looked at it, it's like looks like shit everywhere except in these main areas. But as
Yep.
far as our eyes are concerned, that's where we need it, right?
They're even experimenting with technology now where they eye track in VR and then
Yeah.
do that LOD based on where you're looking and then make
Exactly.
everything else look garbage. So it's actually like iris directed because they're trying to simulate exactly that. It's A, more realistic, and B, not overstimulating, which could help a little bit with motion sickness. And then C, it's also theoretically better for processing power because you're able to
Absolutely.
sort of save some of that that you would otherwise just be wasting on stuff that the player's not even looking at.
Exactly. The only real, I think the downside of all that stuff is how do we archive that? You know, when we look at film stills or paintings, you can kind of observe them as a piece of art or like a piece all in itself. But when you look at something that's been optimized through an AI system, everybody's image is going to look different, and you're going to see a forced point of focus where your interest may not lie where that. It becomes this thing where VR is one of those scary things for me as a filmmaker because it's sort of like how do we take that experience into the future where people can you don't need the same headset. I mean, I guess they've done it with video games. We've found ways to bring the old games back and kind of keep these.
Yeah.
But I just feel like it's different than film because it's hard to because we're working on VR stuff right now in the studio, and I'm interested in VR as a tool, and I'm less interested in it as a medium for artwork. I think it's totally valid, but as a creator myself, I'm still working on the language of filmmaking and trying to like understand that. And we've been seeing the language of VR is totally different. It's as big as the leap from theater to film.
Exactly. To your point, I feel that this is exactly where we're at. We didn't discover the cut yet of the old cinema, and we feel that, this is like film theater. So just like in theater, there's no cut, so we need to show everything. And we didn't fully understand the potential of VR yet in this type of entertainment. So we kind of try to apply what worked with movies. I mean, not technically, but more like in terms of storytelling and all that. And eventually we'll realize that no, movies are great for this, video game are great for this, and VR experience will be great for this kind of new. And I feel I'm under the impression that we did not find it yet.
No, I feel like that too.
VR is still not mainstream. Yes, there's some hardware that is missing. I mean, you still see a little bit, unless you have a $3,000 headset that is hooked on a powerful computer. You don't have with the Rift, the Oculus Rift, for instance, the experience that can have you immersed in this environment for hours, and you're not going to have a headache when you get out of there.
Yeah.
So I think there's the hardware part, but there's also the what should we really do with it, which is part of why it's not mainstream yet.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing. I almost feel like in some ways, just off the top of my head, but I feel like it may replace mushrooms and mushroom trips and acid trips. Like the idea that there may be a non-linear, more something that actually, what we were talking about forests earlier. If you're in the right headspace, the amount of self, I guess I hate saying it, like self-love or self-appreciation or even feeling that you belong in the world can happen in a forest if you're receptive to it. And I think that happens in great film and great art is it can actually bring you to a different level of self-awareness where you're almost looking at yourself in third person and the world, it's all clicking in a different way. And I almost think that with VR, we could find a faster path or a more efficient path to that headspace. Like maybe we don't need to, self-medicate with booze so much, or maybe there's things in it that I would say are more of a fast track to what it takes a lot more work for a movie to do or a piece of art to do or even music to do, right? So maybe there's something there, but we're just not there yet.
Yeah, I agree with you. And one of the kind of experience I thought about when I first tried VR is there's I don't remember what was the name. I think the technology was called Pulsar or something like that, but it's basically in one of those spa salons, and it's basically they put you have like it's not VR, but it's like glasses, and it's just flash of lights, and you have sound, and then the sound that you hear from the right here, the left here, are different sound. Basically, it just messes your brain. You have colors, and you have that. you have this for 15 minutes. You get out of that the amount of endorphin and serotonin that you have. You're just hovering on the ground because it's almost like it's the equivalent of like 6 hours of deep meditation or something like that. What it does to the brain, it just force your brain to think about nothing for 10-15 minutes. And then when you get out of there, it's the same feeling of when you go in the extreme hot, cold, and with all the endorphins and all that. So I think that what you mentioned is something that we're going to recognize, that okay, it might not be the best medium for short film, let's say, but it can be amazing for those kind of experience that some would describe as an acid trip or meditation or being just in the focus and one with it. It might be one of the things that could be interesting.
Sort of like it's a good way of maybe recreating experiences as opposed to like a narrative sort of story, for instance. I mean, I don't know. We had a stream. No, so it was a couple weeks ago. We actually had a friend of mine on who, I don't know if you caught that at all, Daniel, but he's a local. His name's Jeff Malouin, and he built a non-for-profit company called Super Sublime. And basically the idea is he works with a lot of elderly patients and a lot of people in palliative care. And he's going to places that they wish that they could go back to or wish they could go for the first time, capture this in 360, master it for a VR experience, and then put these VR headsets on these people that it might be their first time even in VR. And like there was something very magical that happened when you see them like absorb the closest thing to that experience that they could possibly get, because they're capturing 3D audio as well, and that's all mastered, and there's all these other sound effects that are layered in to make it a bit more full. But like it's very provocative, and it's a pretty inspiring story. But I think that what I like right now is that people are pioneering in that space, and they're trying different things. And like you said, they haven't found it yet, but they're starting to see things. There's connections being made right now as to things that work and things that just don't.
And I think the narrative there's no any narrative line. It's just you just observe, and just as you mentioned, then you're in the forest, there's not enough there, so your imagination kind of fill the gap. Maybe more of those super passive but beautiful landscape that you will have nothing there's no point of focus anywhere, but you can just observe everything and then make your own story of why this, what happened there, and all that. Maybe that this is where it's going.
I don't know about you, David, but go ahead, Daniel.
No, go ahead, Brent.
I was just going to say that I don't know about you, David, but I think if we could somehow create a 3D space of one of these worlds that Daniel seems to create on a regular basis, and then just be able to transport yourself there and be like, it's like, you guys remember the movie The Cell?
Yes.
With, so it's, you know what I mean? Okay. And I'm not trying to say that you're crazy. I'm just saying that, like, to be able to travel into someone's mind, maybe I am, I don't know. I mean, maybe this is passive aggressive attack. I don't know. But basically, to be able to transport and be kind of living, because that's how I always feel. Like I've seen, like, I don't know if you've ever experienced Quill. Quill is a way of So Quill has also like a theater, so you can experience these creations that people that are making these experiences in 3D are doing, and it always feels like it's something different about being. It's like I feel like I'm sharing your workshop, your virtual space. Like I'm there visiting you and seeing what you've made in person. I mean, it doesn't feel exactly like that, but there's something that feels very, I don't know. It's mysterious. Like I feel like it's more tactile. Like I can't really describe it, but as opposed to just seeing it on a flat TV screen or even in 3D, like in a 3D engine, and navigating around using the AWSD keys or my joystick, being able to like feel like I'm in it, because parallax is it's something special. I don't know.
It is something special. I think that's something I want to make sure too is to clarify is I think there's brilliant VR games, and a lot of VR content is just amazing, right? I just think that the tool itself is still, it has another dimension to offer that we haven't maximized yet. Because I mean, I agree with you. I was playing, well, it made me really super sick, but I was playing Star Wars Squadrons. I tried it on the VR, and sitting inside of the cockpit of an X-Wing and an A-Wing or a TIE fighter. I was just I was so fucked up, because also the TIE fighter, I was sitting in, I'm like, man, I would be dead in this little tin box. It's a little tin box with a little window. Like, there's no wonder these guys suck at everything. You can't see anything. And I was thinking too, it's like, what shitty technology, because like, why wouldn't you have like projections of outside of space so you can see all around you in 360? But instead, it's like, it literally looks like the gunner of the bottom of a B-17, and you see this much. And but
that's so funny.
It's like crazy.
It required you to sit in a TIE fighter to suddenly realize, oh, that's why the Death Star exploded. I totally get it.
Exactly. You're like,
This is not ergonomic
this is
at all.
so broken. This is so broken. I'm like, this is terrible. Like, how could anyone survive anything in this piece of crap? And it's funny because like it's in film, you're always looking at everything through with one eye closed and through sort of this like little cutout box, which is more like, which I think is really powerful because you can really control what you see and don't see. So there's this, you're an omniscient presence as a viewer of cinema, you know, like, and the greatest cinema kind of sucks you in, and before you realize it, you're lost inside the world because your brain is filling up everything around you.
Exactly.
But it's all being driven by this little square. VR is different, and but where is that that analogous experience? I'm not sure, but there's something cool there.
Yeah. It's like the world that you see in cinema is the director's small portal of what they want you to know about that world, which can be very powerful narratively, right? You can explain a very specific narrative by only showing, and it's because sometimes it's more important what you don't show. You know what I mean? Because you don't be distracted by a bunch of things that are important.
I would agree with you. VR, in film, it's all about what you don't show.
Yeah, exactly. And so now, to really leverage the other, it's almost more like, rather than seeing the world that you want me to see, I'm seeing the world as it truly is, perhaps, maybe. I can imagine that being a bit of a nightmare to create an experience that's it's compelling enough that feels like I'm able to do that in a way that I really feel like I'm in a world. But there is something there that could possibly be, I don't know. We'll see where it all goes. I'm excited though.
So Dan, speaking of VR, obviously one of the very trendy topics these days is the metaverse. I'm curious with your because you're one of the most creative and technical person that I know, both in one body. So I'm super curious. I'm sure you already had some thoughts about it.
About the metaverse, I think I have a harder time with it just because it's Facebook, I suppose. Like
everyone says
I do have this. There's something I'm not really excited about how disembodied as a culture we're starting to be. I just feel like there's so much more we could be doing to be connecting with ourselves, and I mean, like, it's really hard. It's hard for me to articulate because I don't want to get all philosophical and everything, but through this time of pandemic, through the increased use of social media, through the increased power of advertising, how much how the algorithms that drive the content that we're exposed to on a regular basis, there's this optimization of the human experience, which I think it's a hyper simplified version of what we think people need, which reminds me of the nutrition movement back in the 50s when they thought science would replace food. And then we realized, like, oh shit, we were replacing it all with carcinogens and stuff we didn't even, now we find out is all bad for us. Like they distilled the needs of the human body down to these basic nutrients driven by science. And now we're realizing how complex the gut microbe, the gut biome is, and how it has an influence on your immune system and on your mood, which everyone knew, when you're hangry or you eat like crap all day and you're an ornery bastard. Now we understand that there's actually a science behind that, but we are only starting to really understand that. And so what's really interesting to me is I feel like this whole idea of a hyper simplified, curated version of reality by, I would say, a profit-driven organizations. I'm not optimistic that that's going to be necessarily enlightening or very beneficial in a humanist way, because I don't think it's of value for them for us to be self-fulfilled. It's more important that we reach out to them to find fulfillment. So
I totally agree.
Yeah, that's why I think
it's a pity almost.
It is a tool. It is. Yeah, it is a pity.
Because it could be something quite exciting and almost like bringing the human experience to a whole new era. But their track record is garbage when it comes to how leveraging this I mean, think of what Facebook. There's a lot of great that can happen. It has happened on Facebook. Let's face it. Like, it does connect people. It does allow people to stay in contact with one another, and like it allows people, like, it's all kinds of good. But we know too much now because of too many leaks coming out of that company, that although it could trying to be good in some ways, it's also really just trying to operate and make money, and they don't really care at the end of the day about us and our well-being.
That's okay, because I think that I'm on this like kick lately. It's about empathy and compassion, and I have this thing where it gets back to the forest. As I had this realization one time when I was walking out in the woods, and I saw this lichen that was growing on the side of a tree, and there's because there's these complex communities of lichens all growing on trees. I was just staring at them, and I realized I had this thing where I'm like, the meaning of life is just to live. And then I was thinking about, because we used to get bears, and the bears would get in the garbage all the time. And what you would do is, instead of blaming the bear for getting in the garbage, you'd be like, oh, that idiot bear, don't eat the garbage. You're just like, well, of course it's going to eat the garbage. It's a bear. So why would I create a situation where that bear is getting in the garbage? And I feel that way with human beings. If we were more sympathetic to the fact that we're living organisms in the world, and that we have predispositions to behaviors and patterns that are part of our biological makeup, we wouldn't be so harsh on ourselves and expect ourselves to be so self-controlled and so disciplined. Like all these, like why wouldn't Facebook be a capitalist profit-driven system? That's what it is.
Totally.
That's what people do. When you get big enough, you don't count your friends by the millions, you count your friends by the tens. That's what regular people do. And when you get to such a big level, of course, the world looks different. Humans look different. So to expect that a corporation would have my best interests is an illusion. And I should never have that expectation. I should go in those things recognizing that the good experiences I'm going to have in any platform are the experiences that I bring with me, and with the peers and the people that are close to me, what we do in it. Knowing that room we walk into is not 100% safe place. We have to always know that. It's a human created place that was designed for profit. It wasn't, or they might have had great intentions. Just like art, it's like art. You can't make perfectly personal artwork because it doesn't sell. So you can, like, maybe you're lucky, but when we have a conversation, we try to use words that we connect with each other. I don't just use my own language, right? Because otherwise I'm not saying anything to you. I'm not just like talking in gibberish and unless that's the point. So I think there's just something about the need to connect. And if we want to connect with people, we have to shift the way we interact and we engage. And I think it's normal to need to sell and need to connect. And these companies, they need people to use them, because if they don't, they can't grow. And, anyway, so I just take that at face value, that of course that place is going to be exploitative in some way. There's going to be great stuff in there, but you have to go in there knowing that it's not designed to fulfill me as a human. It's designed to sell products. So
I think it's going to be very interesting also to see the different, because Facebook have been so public in their announcement, and they're even taking the name, like Meta is now there. So there's a lot of people that are under the impression that, the metaverse is Facebook, and that's it. Well, no, they're building their own space within. And and by the way, I'm sure that 5 years from now, the term metaverse itself will be super dated, and we'll be like, do you remember when we were saying it's the highway of information?
Yeah, that's right.
The internet is going to be
what the hell is the
same
internet
thing. But it would be as if we say, Facebook is going to own internet. No, they're going to be the biggest social media on. But I think Megaverse will be what is Epic going to create in there? What is Microsoft going to create in there? What are non-profit organisms are going to create in there? How can you move from one to the other? Which one is completely free and open? Which one is owned by a corporation? That's going to be very interesting to see how it evolves. Because I can only imagine that, just like Facebook is doing now, yes, they're collecting a shitload of data, but it's a free product. That's the price to pay. You don't pay for it by your own information. That's a trade-off that you have. So what is going to be that trade-off in this new world, if some are actually spending a lot of their time in those virtual environments?
I think that's the thing you have to think about when you use anything that's a free tool, or a free anything. It's like, why is it free? Like who's paying? Because somebody has to keep the heats on in the company. So why is this free? And I think as long as you're aware to ask that question, you can't be exploited as easily. Because I don't want to disparage. I think there's brilliant engineers at Facebook. I think the technology and the stuff that they're doing and the things they're creating, I think there's probably a lot of people with the best intentions, and
for sure.
They're creators, they're engineers, inventors. So these are wonderful people with I would say the purest aspirations. But large corporations don't function that way, and no large body does. So, I think I agree with you. There's tons of potential, and we just have to be aware of what we're exchanging when we want to use that potential for free in the society structure, economic structure we have today.
Yeah. Your thoughts on NFTs?
Oh, have you guys done any of those yet?
No.
No. We've been looking into it. It doesn't seem. I've watched a bunch of stuff on NFTs. I'm sure a lot of you have. We even talked to a financial analyst about them. I think that's what the role of that individual was. But essentially, what it seems to me, an NFT is valuable if you have a strong social following, because you basically have
exactly.
There's no other way to validate create the value behind your work without a whole bunch of people saying it's worth something.
No real life painting has any value if it's coming from an artist that no one knows.
Exactly.
That's the same thing.
People that's the part a lot of people don't get the backstory, right? They hear just about this guy who sold some NFTs for millions of dollars, and they were sold in what the hell is that auction house in the States? Really popular one. Doesn't matter.
I can't remember.
Christie's. So basically, that was a sensation, right? And everyone's talking about how you can make all this money. But like, what they don't talk about enough is that Beeple has been around for years and years and years. A prolific digital artist who had a gigantic following. And so, the way that some people see it is that he's just finally cashing in on those years and years of branding. But I mean, so not just anybody showing up expecting to make that kind of coin. I don't know. I really feel like you said, that's part of the recipe. You need to have some sort of presence.
Well, you need a story. I think that's a big thing we always talk about here, is that you need a story. People respond to story. People get really frustrated. My dad, he's more of an engineer type, and my mom's an artist, but he'll look at something and be like, oh, my kid could paint that. But then you're like, well, your kid didn't. And the story of your kid painting that isn't that interesting.
I like it.
It's just like, so you need the backstory. It's like, where did this art come from? And obviously that stuff can be very manufactured, but you're still, it's funny because it's funny that we're talking about this, because when you're selling an NFT, even with Beeple, you're actually selling the story behind the NFT is more of a symbol that represents the story of where it came from. So it's like, it's like owning a part of a huge epic story.
Exactly.
All of the entire culture's in on, which is interesting. And I think that's where like fan art and all these things, they have value. There's a lot of artists that explode online because they do like, they'll do anime characters that just don't have much Western art created around it. And then all of a sudden people love their work, just escalates because it's like people have already an intrinsic value placed on those characters. So that artist gets brought up with the value of those characters. So it makes a lot of sense, but you need that. That's why we're not doing it. It's like, we're not really anybody right now. Maybe one day, but right now it's like, it doesn't seem worth it for me.
Yeah, it's right now, it's the Wild West of NFTs, and it's going up and down and up and down. I mean, the idea of those, smart contract under an NFT that you can resell whenever it's taking value, and the original, creator is going to have 10% each time, which means that if you're there's so many artists that became very famous after their death, and their entire family never had anything. Well, now it would be possible that for forever every other generation will kind of benefit from the artwork of their ancestors. So that's an interesting
I love that idea. I love that idea, that where you can attach stipulations to the sale and all that, and there's like longevity to a sale. I love that. I still think it's like still quite inaccessible for most artists trying to get the Bitcoin wallet and actually getting the stuff minted, your artwork minted. It's still quite inaccessible.
It's not trivial.
No, it's pretty hard. I mean, I've looked into it for about a week, and it's like, this is a lot. I don't have the headspace for it right now, but it's a lot.
And another dimension to it, of course, when it comes to achieve its fullest sort of potential, there needs to be the majority of people need to buy into the idea, and that means that currency needs to be in everyone's pocket. And there's a lot of reasons why a lot of people don't want to jump in. Environmental impacts being, of course, at the top of some people's list. It was someone in chat was mentioning that, and and then a lot of these companies that are developing blockchain technologies are pivoting and trying to find more green friendly versions of supporting its the sustainability of the blockchain, but it's still not necessarily, the adoption rate is still, it's still a very niche group of people that are really investing and driving this. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. I love the idea of it. I do
Me
love
too.
the idea of decentralizing money and money distribution. The
Totally.
downside of it, though, is like now the banks are buying all that stuff anyway. So it's
That's true. Well, and the point I always make is, it's like, one of the biggest positive advantages is, no one's controlling the money, but the disadvantage is nobody's controlling the money. In other words, where are the police? Where are the people who can enforce rules and regulations and making sure that stuff happens on the up and up, as opposed to some shady dealings? That, yes, of course, it's impossible to hack this blockchain, but it doesn't mean that it can't be manipulated in certain ways. And it doesn't mean that, what about the rules? Like the classic example I've always said about NFTs is, who's stopping? Like if you were to launch a series, let's say tomorrow you're like, screw it, I decided to put out some NFTs, and you're going to mint a bunch of things in a limited series, and people go buy them, and then you make like a whole pile of money overnight, and you're like, well, I should probably just print more of these, and then you go and make another limited edition series. It's like, who stops? Like, because the idea of scarcity is that, like, there's only one Mona Lisa. There's only one of them, which is why it's worth so much money. But as soon as it, so scarcity, in like, when it comes to our basic understanding of economics of, like, supply and demand, it's sort of somehow, in my mind, unless there's a regulatory body that's controlling this kind of thing, it would suck. Because what happens if I do decide that I want to invest in buying one of your prints, and then it literally devalues overnight because you decided to print more of them? It's like, well, who's stopping you? Nobody. So these are the kind of things that I have problems with. It's like, it just seems like the Wild West right now, and people are just making up the rules as they go. And some people are making a lot of money. A lot of people are losing a lot of money at the same time too. So it's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's as if just the idea of creating digital scarcity is amazing, but how it's being used right now, it's still very new and naive and not mature yet.
But like you said, Daniel, the promise is huge.
Yeah.
The idea of giving people, like digital artists, a way of literally making a living without having to become a commercial artist, but just creating what they want to create and then be able to survive off of that. This in itself is good for everybody,
and we can easily transport ourselves. Let's say that we're 10 years from now, the metaverse, yes, there's Facebook and all those others, and there's a lot of people that do spend a lot of time because the hardware is adequate and you don't have a headache. And yes, there's those places like Sandbox and Decentraland that you can walk around, and you just have the only piece of art, 3D piece of art, animated, that everyone can look in VR, and you're the only one that has it. And it's so impressive and so beautiful that you have a lot of people that will actually go there to see it. That's the only one, because because you own the NFT, and then they're selling literally publicity around. So you have a corporation that will pay you real money to have the visibility of publicity around this unique piece of art. So you can see how there's an entire financial ecosystem that can be built around those NFT, because that was one of the main question in the beginning. Well, how do you show an NFT? And there was a lot of creative ways with creating the hardware, or basically just show the JPEG or use it as your profile picture. But I think that when it's becoming now in a virtual world and you can really experience it, have the proper experience, it might be something that will be very, very real and very interesting and very financially interesting for art collectors to invest into. And
I also think on that level is, I think NFTs, it's funny that we think it's so new in some ways, because isn't that what the Diablo auction house is? Like, isn't that all that stuff? It's like all the World of Warcraft, like this stuff's actually been around a long time. Is that
I agree with you, and I think that this is a very interesting point. I've never had anyone make this comparison before, but it is worth noting that the World of Warcraft auction house and the Diablo one were both busts, and they removed them. Well, I don't know about the Diablo one, but the World of Warcraft one for sure is because they started to realize that it's actually not so easy to actually have, because it needs to have a proper economy that runs it. A good example of a game that has a very healthy economy and the whole game runs on it is EVE Online. If anyone's ever curious, if you like economic-based games, you need to check out this game. It's very, very impressive because they actually, a lot of their lead level designers or game designers are economists, because they knew that they needed people who understand how to stimulate an economy, how to keep it fair so that people don't feel like they're just getting ripped off all the time. Like it's pretty impressive. So it isn't new, like you said, but it's also riddled with previous failures. So
we'll that's interesting. It just hasn't. I agree with you though. It hasn't had the right people involved. Now that the economists are interested in these people with hundreds of years of financial history, I still think the idea though of creating value in an infinitely reproducible object is not old. It's very old, and I think that the thing is that sucks. You know, your example earlier about what keeps me from printing and selling more and more. Well, if I do that, the value of my next batch of work goes down and goes down and down and down.
That's true.
Because I
you devalue your own brand.
Yeah, you extinguish your own value very quickly. It doesn't make it better for the people that got duped by it the first time, but as far as your sustainability as a creator, you petered out real quick. So
never thought
there
of
is
that.
Something self-regulating about it in some ways too.
Hey, I just wanted to mention that completely expectedly, because I knew this conversation was going to feel like I would blink, it would disappear. We're already about 15 minutes after 3. We usually try to leave a little bit of room for people to ask questions. I think there were a couple in there. Hopefully you don't mind me pivoting a little bit and doing that. And I think I would start with my first question, just because I find it interesting that we didn't. I think it's just because the conversation was so fun. We never even got into some of the background on you. Like, you're an award-winning filmmaker as well. Like, it might, it's worth noting that you have done quite a few impressive things. I wanted, maybe just for the sake of some people who don't know your work and what you've done, maybe you could just touch on really quickly some of those films and maybe what you're currently working on, just to kind of give people and maybe where they can go to check out some of your work. I think would be awesome.
Yeah, sure. I'm sorry. It's funny. We're here to talk about films and we all talked about like a lot, everything around it. Well, that's good. It actually suits me just fine because it's, I don't know. We have a lot of our films have been in film festivals, and they're kind of harder to see because I don't have distribution ownership of them. So they've been screened all over the place. They've been on the airplane. They've been all over the place. And now I think some of them you can find on the NFB website, the NFB site, because we did a bunch of films for the NFB. So they have a few of them. I'm sorry. I should have more of a list. I mean, the most recent film we did was Giant Bear. That was the most recent animated short that we did, and that one won a Canadian Screen Award. Did really well for us, and that one I don't know if you can currently see it anywhere yet, because again we don't own the distribution on it, but that's something that we've been working towards, and that's the film I'm working on now with Harry Hill. We own that one completely. That's the one that Agora actually helped do the animation on. It's taken a long time. It's something we wanted to have out a couple of years ago. COVID didn't really help producing that animation, but also it's a style of film that is a complexity we've never ever done before. So it's destroying my life in many ways, but I'm very excited about it because we never did full 3D before. So
I find it interesting that the as an artist, it's usually the ones that hurt the most that they're the most rewarding, right? The most punishing ones.
They all seem super punishing. I find every one of them is like, they all feel like this is going to be the worst thing ever made. Like there's these moments where like, this is going to be the best thing we ever made. And then literally 5 minutes later, like, this is the worst thing. Everyone's going to hate it. It sucks. And then just like riding out these lumps of being excited and then being miserable. Yep. And then, and then that's all padded out by just being focused, like trying to solve the problem of making this goddamn thing. And I think that's like, I don't know.
It's worth noting for context to the chat that Daniel suffers from crippling modesty. Just everyone knows. Just setting the stage. Crippling modesty. Go ahead, David. Sorry.
I just wanted to mention that it seems that a theme that we're coming back every week because we have a bunch of amazing artists that are often suffering from the imposter syndrome. So just want to share that even if you have your own studio and you're an amazing artist and everything you release is at least well received critically in terms of being well executed and beautiful and done, yeah, so then you still have this imposter syndrome with your own art and feeling this all up and down of it's amazing, I suck, it's amazing, no one likes what we're doing.
Yeah, I think that that's the thing is I only find if I look at a film that I've worked on 5 or 6 years later, I can finally be like, oh yeah, it's not that bad. Oh, there's some nice things. There's a naivety to it. There's like, it's kind of a nice little package. It works. And I'm not noticing all the problems as much. I can look at it more as though I didn't make it, but I even have this problem as a director. I'm so much more easily impressed by other people's work than my own, that I have a tendency to even just like when people are working on shots that I didn't work on, I'll be like, oh, that's awesome. And it takes me a while to realize what's not awesome about the shot. So I'm not really quick at giving feedback because I will look at it, and because I didn't make it, I'm not scrutinizing it on this level of because I don't know, when you make something yourself, it depends what kind of artist you are, but I feel like there's something just tired about it. You've been through the whole arc of it, and it's
totally
the exciting thing is before it's realized, because it's like infinite potential, and you're like, I'm going to tap all these skills, I'm going to learn all this stuff, but then learning's hard and nothing comes out the way you want exactly, and there's always a million other people, especially now in this era of ArtStation and Instagram. Everybody's better than you, and everybody's work is like, I mean, not obviously little kids, it's different, but there's always something, and different is often more stimulant. I find even people that do like really simple, quaint little things, I find I'm just like, wow, why am I not doing stuff like that? Everything I make is complicated and ridiculous. There's always some kind of self-critical thing,
Yeah.
It's true. Huh? It's almost like the stuff that your own stuff you look at and you're like, all you see is the stuff that it's not, that you wish it could have been. It's like a moratorium on like you're haunted by the missed opportunities in your mind, right?
Yeah, and there's nothing special. Like I think that's true. Is when you've witnessed the process of making something firsthand, the spectacle, the magic trick is gone, because you see all the wires, right? You're sort of like this isn't. You're not discovering something, and you're not discovering that thing when you look at it anymore. You already discovered it and dug all the holes, and you're kind of. So I think there's that you don't get to. I used to work at a restaurant. I was a dish pig for like 3 years. I had no ambition, I suppose. And like, it's funny how when I would go to a restaurant, I was just like, oh my God, it's amazing. Someone's serving me food. And it was so, because at my own restaurant, I just, you were so much part of behind the scenes that there felt to be nothing special about that place whatsoever. No matter how prestigious or how amazing the restaurant was, you were just, it was just a shitty place you worked. It wasn't. Yeah.
You're just a dude cleaning dishes, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Brent, I think that would be a pretty good segue to one of the questions that we had from player pawn_0.
I can do that.
Then you briefly mentioned about going on ArtStation and being either depressed or inspired by it. So, where do you get your inspiration in general?
Well, I definitely don't get it from ArtStation or Instagram. I think
that's where you go to get shamed.
Yeah, that's where I go to feel like garbage after, and just like, oh. And how old are these people? Oh, you're 8 and you can do that? Amazing.
That's great.
Amazing. Wicked. Yeah. That's a good question.
Did you just say wicked? You just said wicked.
Yeah, I did say
I've been
wicked.
trying to bring that back too.
Yeah.
Go Team Wicked, buddy. Go Team Wicked.
Yeah. Done. Yeah. We're doing it. That's a good question. I find most of my inspiration comes when I sit outside and just draw. I try to draw people, and I have this technique because I'm super technical, and I tend to be a little bit uptight, a little bit structural, like very anatomical and stuff like that. One exercise I found was really good for me was to not look at my paper. It's like rapid blind contour. So instead of, and I'll do it with everything, even on the computer when I'm trying to come up with a character, is I'll glance at the paper really quickly and then not look back. And it keeps me, I even do stuff where I'm like doing arms and stuff, and I'm just making these looser shapes all the time. And one of the things it does for me is it helps like eradicate that control aspect or that technical aspect of like, this is what an arm looks like, this is what a face. So when I draw people, I'll draw them walking. I never draw sitting. I have a hard time drawing sitting models, but I'll draw people walking or sitting and moving their head the whole time and just try to move as quickly as possible. And I find I get some of the most interesting designs from that, because I'm not planning what I'm doing. I'm just reacting to the real world. And I find that really inspiring. When I look at other artists, yes, I can be inspired by their technique and what they did, but it doesn't help me feel necessarily super good about what I'm doing or where I'm at. Because I guess I'm just an insecure, jealous person. So,
well, I just think oh, go ahead, David.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I just think it's all just further evidence that no amount of recognition, fame, or success will allow anyone to escape that little person that lives inside our head that tells us we suck a little bit. I think there's no escape. There's just no escape. And if you want to hear that same voice amplified with a megaphone, go to places like our station. You'll get that very, very quickly.
Yeah, exactly.
Dan, I was curious, what about motivation? When you're just at work on a project, unmotivated, like, you just don't want to be there. Do you just brute force your way through it, or you have some either little routine or stuff that you do that can either take a few seconds or a couple days to get back this motivation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Because that motivation sinkhole doesn't happen very often to me. Lately, well, for a while it hasn't, but I think that's only because one, I had a kid, and then the having a kid gets in the way of the ability to like work something. I'm always interrupted. So I always have these like things I never got to finish seeing all the way through. So I always have this kind of, there's already a momentum of like, oh man, I was working on this thing. I almost had it figured out, but I had to put it down. So I'm always coming back to something a lot of the time. When I feel unmotivated is typically when I'm working, especially when I'm working on someone else's project. Like in a big project. And I don't mean like when we were doing the game stuff when I was working on the game stuff for you, that stuff was like super fun because it's exploration. It's like, but when you get into the tedium of you've done the fun designs and now you're just going through the process of executing, I think that's where that hump can happen. And usually for me, there's two things. Is definitely I have to get exercise. Like if I'm really not feeling motivated, I'm not going to force it because I won't do good work and I'll probably make mistakes. So I try to go for a walk. I try to work out or do something to like get out of the slump, because otherwise you just sort of sit there and next thing you know, you're on YouTube. And the other thing which I learned, I think it was quoted from, I can't remember I'm not going to misquote, but there was this thing where you set 20 minutes on a stopwatch on your computer. And you turn off YouTube, everything, and you just poke that 20-minute thing, and you're like, okay, I'm going to paint for 20 minutes. And you poke go, and you don't allow yourself to do anything else. And I find that really helps because it contains the amount of time you're going to do something. So you're not looking at a giant wall of time, like I need to do 8 hours of blah, blah, this shitty painting. I'm so miserable. It's like, oh, I got to sit and do this for 20 minutes. And then next thing you know, you actually, that 20 minutes goes by really fast and you made some good progress. So those are some things I try for sure, but it doesn't always work.
A lot of people, I hear a lot of people talking like on the subject of productivity, and it seems to be a very popular mentality, this idea of like, look, even if it's just 5 minutes, build habits. Build habits of time boxing some time, because what it does is it starts to build momentum, because then you start to feel the rewards of habitually doing something and be able to focus for that long on something. And next thing you know, you're doing it for 10 and then 15, then 20. Next thing you know, you're able to do multiple hours of sustained focus just because you're sort of like flexing that muscle like a regular workout routine. You wouldn't start trying to deadlift 250 pounds on day one, right? You got to work your way up to it. And I think it's pretty good advice.
Actually, one thing on that is whenever I talk to people about exercise or working out or anything like that, it's the same thing as I always tell people, don't start working out, just go for a walk. Tell yourself I'm going to walk around the block one time. And then that's what you do.
Totally.
And often what happens is same thing with drawing. I think about drawing every day. It's super hard to make yourself do it. Just put a piece of paper down in front of yourself. I'm going to draw for 5 minutes. And you're right. Next thing you know, you do more. And some days you don't, but at least it's okay. You didn't set up a goal. You didn't set up predetermined point of failure every day. Because you're like, I'm going to draw every day for an hour for a week. You're going to fail at that, you know?
Exactly. And then that's not a good way to build momentum. As player Han Zero points out, I think one of the core philosophies behind this sort of technique is called the Pomodoro technique. So if you want to take a look, and there's even apps you can get for Windows or on your phone that allow to simulate this sort of time boxing, you might want to look into. So if you're in chat looking for something to experiment with to try to help your focus a little bit, you might want to look into that, because it really helps a lot of people. I have another question here from Van Animator, which is, what was the catalyst exactly going from artist to starting a studio? does seem like a big leap. What was the reasoning there behind that decision?
Okay. So I'll try to be really quick because I know we're running out of time. I don't think I am. I think I am just now, I would say, qualifying for myself as becoming an artist now. Because for me, I know you guys laugh about it, but for me, like this Harry Hill is the first film that I've kind of written, directed, and actually like that we brought together as our own thing. And I wasn't me collaborating or having to be responsive to somebody, which obviously will make its failure feel that much worse when it's like, it's all your fault. But anyways, so the thing is like historically, I was always making stuff for, even if I was getting a contract and I got to be creative and come up with all the characters, most of it was driven by a need to create something that I agreed with someone to create. So the whole thing about like going from an artist to a studio is like, I think I started as more of a freelancer making stuff because I used to make videos for my school. Like people would get me to make animated ads in school on these, like in grade school and stuff. I was always making shit for somebody, but it was never just making stuff for the sake of making stuff, which I think is a little bit different. So most of my life I've been in service to other people on a bigger level. And even all my homework assignments, I turned into animated films. So everything was always driven by some kind of deadline and something I had to do. And so I think that's important for art, but at the same time, I never really, other than sketches and doodles, got to explore a full artistic vision, at least what I would call that, in a really holistic way. So the studio almost was a byproduct of always working on projects for people, and those projects getting bigger and bigger, harder to manage, and having actually, my partner, Emily, we just work really well together and recognizing our strengths. Like I'm more of the bricklayer and she's really good at actually managing the production and, and finding those people that help complete the picture. Cause I used to do everything in the early days and I would mess up most of it, but the work was good enough that everyone's like, okay, great. We'll put up with all your bullshit as long as we make this piece of work. And it's basically on time, cause usually, but now that whole studio was required. Cause that's the other thing. If I get sick or anything happens, everything stops when you're a freelancer, right? So part of the studio too was like, how do we build something up that can support other people, other artists, and where I'm not the main driving wheel for the whole thing. And we have great artists working for us that are better than me. And I think that that's the thing that's really exciting to me is I'm being replaced in the studio, which is amazing. I thought that I would hate that. I thought I'd be like, oh man. But now what it means is I'm like actually being able to revisit art again, if that makes sense, and start to be less about product all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. You don't have to worry about the bottom line. You could just worry about creating. And then that's when true art can probably happen because it's art for art's sake, as opposed to art for putting bread on the table kind of sake, right?
Yeah. And I think like, because we talked earlier, art is a conversation with your audience. So like, if I wanted to be truly and fully indulgent, I would just make art and no one would ever see it. I'm too vain for that. Like I need to be acknowledged in some way. So I'm still interested in art being a product in some way, but that product being explorations that are fueled by my own curiosities or by the world that I value is different than being responsive to someone else's needs all the time.
Right. Okay. Well, it's a lot of information to unpack, but this has been a very, it's
ending with a bang.
I knew this conversation was going to be a deep one. Okay. So we're at time. I think it's a good idea to probably wrap things up. I don't want to take too much of your time, Daniel. I want to thank both you and David. David, you want to say something? Sorry.
Nope.
Oh, okay. I saw your lips look like they're poised. So yeah, I just wanted to thank both your time as usual for being here today and having this conversation. Thank you for being here, chat, and in asking the questions and absorbing. Daniel, good luck to you and that little voice in your head. May he be silenced forever. And I look forward to seeing all the. Can people go see anything on this Harry Hill thing, or is it like totally like secret right now?
No, it's not secret. There's a bunch of stuff on my Instagram. Okay. There's like little. I just haven't shown any full animation with the thing on because I was saving that for the trailer. But the trailer was supposed to come out like a year ago. Anyways, the film is coming out It'll be out this spring. Like it's going to be done.
Oh, that's exciting.
We're rendering. It's going to be finished finally. There's stuff you can see works on progress on our Vimeo, but mostly on my Instagram. That's where most of it is living right now. But but yeah, it'll be out there.
And when it's released, then that would be great. Maybe to have you again and just focus on Harry Hill, because I think it's going to be a pretty special little piece of entertainment. So
yeah, thank you. Well, you guys did great work
forward to it
too. So yeah, thanks for your time and patience. I appreciate
it. Thanks, Dan. That was great.
Yeah. Talk to you guys soon, and we'll try to drag you back into the chat there when that comes out. We can have a little bit of a retrospect on all of it, and a bit of a deep dive. That'd be great. Okay, well, Daniel, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day. David,
thank
you as well.
Yeah.
See you guys.
Thank you, everyone. Okay.
Cheers.
Bye.
Yeah, you got to really check out Daniel's work. He is pretty awesome, and the stuff I really want to see Harry Hill, because I think it's going to be most likely next level. I think that his stuff, if you've seen it, if you're like me and has seen some of his work, it's just something so it's hard to even describe it. It's just there's a layer of depth to it, and I really feel like he's taken. That's why I touched on it earlier when I asked that question about, it's funny that he started with Power Animator, and in the way he sees software as being kind of calculating and mathematical, because that's, even being a very technical guy, it's interesting that he says that, because yes, you do need to learn and master the technical aspects of the job, but you don't want the art itself to become too technical. And I think he's really found a way of leaning in on that quite a bit. And a lot of his stuff has a very retro feel to it, but mixed with a lot of sort of like modern filmmaking techniques. So I would highly recommend you take a look at some of the stuff he's done. Maybe find him on Instagram. That's all. Scott's reading my mind. So there's his Instagram right there if you want to check out some of his work. It's in chat. So thanks again, chat, for being here. Stay animated, and I'll see you on the next stream. Cheers.
Dun, dun, dun.